This program documents actual homicide investigations. Criminal charges are often dropped or reduced, and all suspects shown are presumed innocent unless proven guilty.
There was blood coming through the apartment down the hallway. The blood trail continued out of the front door.
People experience jealousy in a series of emotions. Because you were jealous of these things, you did this.
That definitely set him off. He's not in a world where he has a lot of positive relationship. He's kind of left up to his own devices, and his own devices was guns and anger.
Ultimately, this was a collision course that was destined to happen unless somebody stepped in.
On December 31st of 2009, I was working patrol in the city of Burien. And around 9:30 at night, dispatch toned out a call of a shooting that had just occurred.
911, what are you reporting?
I need an ambulance.
And you need an ambulance?
Yes, please.
We have a shooting.
Please don't do this to me, baby.
The caller is so upset she isn't able to provide a lot of details. Deputies immediately race to the address.
It's a 2-story apartment, but it's only probably 10, maybe 12 units total. So 6 downstairs, 6 upstairs.
Arriving at a scene like this, you're very cautious because you don't know exactly what you're getting yourself into. So with that, we had stopped on the roadway so that we could get a view of the apartment from a relatively safe distance, and if the shooter was still in the area and potentially looking to start shooting at us, our cars could afford us some cover. Once we had at least another 2 or 3 officers at the scene, we made the decision that we needed to go into the apartment where this shooting had occurred. When we entered into sort of a living room, kitchen area, and there was a short hallway that went back to a bathroom and 2 bedrooms on the back side of the apartment. We did not find anybody in the apartment until Deputy Smithmeyer and I entered one of the back bedrooms. We found a young female face down.
She was small in stature. She was a teenager, you could tell, just by looking at her.
The 911 caller tells dispatch the victim's name is Micaiah Sanders, and she's only 15.
It was quite obvious that she had been shot on the left side of her face in the cheek area. It was a very significant wound. There was a fair amount of blood on the covers of the bed, and she was laying partially face down. Deputy Smithmeyer tried to find a pulse on the young lady, and he told me, I can't get a pulse.
So I started to do CPR. She was aspirating a lot of blood out of her nose and out of the hole in her cheek. I think between myself and Deputy Ostrom, we continued CPR for several minutes until aid got there.
Micaiah Sanders was born in 1994 in Seattle, Washington.
Micaiah was just social. She was a good baby. She didn't hardly cry. She just was easy to get along with. And so that's how Micaiah was growing up. She was always smiling, having fun, laughing, and, just being that bright person in the room.
Micaiah, her personality was the biggest and best thing about her. She was very bubbly. She would just make you happy being around her because that's the energy she would bring.
Micaiah's father was not in the picture, so her grandmother helped raise her along with her brother and sister. It was a loving home, but with strict rules.
I went to Micaiah's grandma's house for the first time shortly after we met, and I had a graphic t-shirt on with a skull or something on it. She's like, oh no, you can't walk in here with that. Zip your jacket up. My grandma's not having that. We're not raised like that. You can't wear that.
She had a super support structure. It wasn't just our village and our family, it was just so much broader. She would have these friends and these people that anywhere she went, it was always, you know, my Kara wanting to be exposed to new people, new things, and trying different things for her life.
My Kara, I think, had a genuine love for people. She was really involved with church with her grandmother. She comes from a very spiritually centered home.
Faith was such an important part of my Kara's life that when she was 13, she went on her first missionary trip with her grandmother.
They went a few places, but their main place was in India because they were going to build school and church for the people of this village. And this was right after the earthquake that triggered the major tsunami over there. They were gone for about a month and a half doing missionary work, building that church and building that school.
She talked so much about that trip. And I think that experience is where that dedication to service came from.
My Kara came home to Washington State, determined to continue helping the less fortunate. She began to volunteer for an after-school program designed to keep kids away from drugs and street life.
Part of the programming that we did was around volunteerism and getting young people engaged in service. And I knew I could always count on her for that.
My Kara made a lot of friends volunteering, but high school was a different story.
My understanding is that my Kara was going to a school doing well academically and ran into somebody that was a bully. And in dealing with this other young lady, she ended up having to go to another school.
Changing schools is never easy for a teenager, but my Kara met a young man at the new school who made it worthwhile. His name was Matthew Deo.
With Matthew and my Kara, it was like the good girl attracted to the bad boy.
The environment that Matthew grew up in was one that was dangerous, not only to him, but other kids his age. They grew up in an area where lives are often cut shorter, and they're brutal and they're violent, and the fear of death via murder is present. Matthew, like many others, was a young man that's just trying to navigate a very brutal environment. She saw the best in Matthew and what his possibilities were, and clearly she was attracted to him as somebody that she wanted to date.
My Kara has this thing about her. It's a gift she's had. She likes to save people and love people. And I think she viewed Matthew as someone who had been underserved and underloved, and that because she had met him, it was suddenly her job to prove and show this love that I know she could see very clearly that he didn't have.
It didn't take long for my Kara to fall in love. When she wasn't studying or volunteering, she was with Matthew.
She was very loyal and made sure that she went above and beyond for him. She would always be there getting them food, getting them stuff. She had this unmatched loyalty, like right or wrong, she's gonna be there for you. And that's what I think he's seen and admired in her.
New Year's Eve 2009 marked the couple's 6th month together. So my Kara wanted it to be special, but their celebration turned into a nightmare instead. My Kara is clinging to life after an unexplained shooting, but investigators quickly discover there's more to the story.
When we left the apartment and secured it, there were several other deputies on scene, and I noticed that there was a lot of activity just upstairs from where we were.
While authorities were responding to my Kara's shooting, another call came in. My Kara isn't the only victim.
Please, the young man's been shot. Somebody's collapsing, please.
All right, what's the young man's name?
Matthew.
The caller lives in the apartment upstairs. She says that minutes earlier, the victim stumbled to her door with a gunshot wound.
He's bleeding intestinal in the stomach side. Something else. I don't know. I can't believe it happened.
There was blood coming through the apartment down the hallway towards the front door. And when you walked out of the front door, the blood trail continued around to the stairway that led upstairs to where the young man was with the gunshot to his shoulder.
The second victim is Micara's boyfriend, 16-year-old Matthew DuBois. Desperately destabilized Matthew DuBois and Micara Sanders after a New Year's Eve shooting. Police question the woman who made the first 911 call. She tells them she's the girlfriend of Matthew's older brother. The apartment where they were shot is the DuBois family residence.
The female that had been in the lower apartment where the shooting occurred had stated that she had been over there due to the fact that they were getting together for New Year's.
They're all in the apartment together. She ends up leaving this apartment because she had been calling her boyfriend and he wasn't answering. She leaves this apartment and runs to her grandmother's apartment, which is right in the same complex, and tries to call him from that number, hoping that he will answer. She says she knew her grandma was home, but her grandmother didn't answer. While she's about to knock again, she says she hears a loud bang. At this point, she heads back downstairs to see exactly what happened because she heard the boom and it sounded like it came from her apartment. As she's heading downstairs to go to her apartment, she claimed to police that she saw a black male running from the apartment. And it was someone she didn't recognize. She says that she hears Matthew calling for help, and she runs in and she sees Matthew holding his shoulder and he's bleeding profusely. And Matthew apparently kept repeating that they ran in the house, they ran in the house. Knowing that Matthew's been shot, she then goes to look for Micara. She looks for Micara inside the house and she finds her inside the room and she's lying in a pool of blood. She calls 911. But she was asked during this interview, what did the suspect look like? What did you see? And she said she didn't see much. She saw this black male running from the scene and he had short black hair and she described him as short.
The woman says she has no idea who the man was or why he shot Matthew and Micara. Deputies take a closer look at the DuBois' apartment to see if they can find any clues.
It looked like the furniture was out of place. Like it wasn't very tidy, but it was more than that. It was more like a struggle had ensued of some sort or a fight or something.
In a scene like this, we're not going to start digging through a bunch of stuff because there is going to be a search warrant that is going to need to be procured for the detectives. Basically, ours was just a cursory view of the apartment to see if we did, in plain view, notice a gun sitting somewhere or any other items that we felt would have evidentiary value. At that point, neither of us had seen a gun. The only thing that we did notice is what appeared to be a bullet hole in that door.
Unfortunately, nothing they find helps identify the shooter. For that, they need to talk to the victims, and only Matthew is conscious.
After some time of the paramedics working on Micara, they were able to stabilize her to the point that they could get her loaded up in an ambulance and transport her to hospital.
At this stage, it's critical to try to talk to Matthew and get as much information from him as possible before he goes off to the hospital because he could be incapacitated. He could die from his injuries. But you want to get some information out of him about a possible suspect. So they go over to talk to Matthew, and as they're talking to him, Matthew says that a suspect came in and he described him as a black male with a blue bandana and shot him and his girlfriend from across the room.
He was seen with a blue bandana, which was insinuating potentially that he was part of a gang.
With Matthew DuBois' description of the gunman who attacked him and his girlfriend, Micara Sanders, deputies searched the surrounding area. It hasn't been long since the shooting occurred, so he might still be in the neighborhood.
Being that it was New Year's Eve, there were a lot of people having get-togethers and parties at their apartments. So one of the things that we did is a lot of deputies went around and knocked on apartments to talk to people, stop people in the street, ask them, did you hear anything? Did you see anything unusual? And we couldn't come across anybody that was aware of something taking place or seeing somebody running from that apartment complex. We had a canine officer who had arrived on the scene, and he had tried for a track of the suspect, and that track was unsuccessful. The dog just wasn't indicating on anything to give us an idea of where the suspect potentially had fled to.
As the search continues, investigators turn their attention to the second 911 caller, the grandmother who lives in the apartment upstairs.
She's telling detectives that Matthew came, knocked on her door, and he had this gunshot wound, and that was when she got involved.
She claims she had been home all night, and there had been no knock on her door before Matthew's.
At this point, detectives are getting concerned because the story's not adding up.
The woman's granddaughter, the first 911 caller, told investigators she had knocked earlier.
There was the realization that things weren't jiving. It was decided at that time that they would try to get some clarification on those things that were not, the pieces weren't fitting together the same way.
Detectives take the first caller to the station for further questioning. At the hospital, Micara's loved ones are waiting for news of her condition.
Matthew was in surgery, so the waiting room for Matthew was downstairs. Micara was upstairs, and I didn't understand why at that time, but I know that I was trying to get to Micara, so we were asking the doctors, can we see Micara? How's Micara?
The head surgeon, when she came into my waiting room, I was already on my knees praying and crying for her life to be spared. So when she came in, I didn't even see this woman's face. I seen her walk in the room. And it's just like these things. I don't know. I knew she didn't have nothing good to tell me.
The surgeon explains they've done everything they can, but the bullet did too much damage.
Her machines that were hooked up to her organs started beeping and going off. We agreed to let her go peacefully.
Just before 2 a.m. on January 1st, 2010, Micara Sanders is taken off life support. She dies in her mother's arms.
I was at peace because I knew what had happened to her was causing her extreme pain that she had never felt before. But I was very angry because something was stolen and ripped from me that I knew I could never get back.
I just broke down. I just started bawling. Felt like my heart was pulled out of my chest. I'm like, there's no way. Like, there's absolutely no way.
Later that morning, detectives come by to talk to Zakiya Sanders to see if she knows of anyone who'd want to hurt her daughter. She says Micara was helping troubled kids at a local teen center and worries it might have gotten her involved with some dangerous people.
Micara did live a very structured and sheltered life. We accounted for all the activities of her day. Being at the teen center with these other children, I just think that they kind of, gave her that opportunity to do something a little different and a little more than what she had been experiencing, and that the reward was going to be a good time and excitement.
Her independence had evolved. I think she was trying to really figure out, as a young adult, what freedoms do I have? Which way can I go? And, who do I want to be around?
Zakiya says she's been particularly concerned about her daughter's relationship with Matthew Du Bois.
She knows that I didn't approve of certain behaviors, and she knows that I didn't approve of certain activities for her age, and that I was very strict and very disciplined about what and how I wanted her to be exposed to the outside world. We weren't raised with young women, especially that were unwed, having boyfriends. That was not a standard for conduct that was going to be tolerated within our family.
My Kara was caught between worlds, for sure. And we would have these conversations all the time. She understood that some of the things that she was doing wasn't really reflecting how she was brought up.
The relationship that they were trying to form was not going to be approved by any elder in her community. So he had to be her secret, and that he was.
Authorities also discover another reason Kara kept Matthew a secret. He has a criminal record, including charges of burglary and illegal possession of a firearm.
Without question, Matthew had been in trouble. He had been in trouble before he ever met Kara. He was in alternative school for a reason. He had been in and out of juvenile detention for a reason. And he was on electronic home detention on December 31st, 2009, when Kara visits him.
I hope she didn't catch a bullet behind this man. I hope she didn't try to stand in front of him and try to protect him for somebody he's fighting.
So far, investigators have conflicting stories about what happened the night Kara Sanders was killed, and little physical evidence to go on. But that's about to change.
The next day when I came in to work, I had heard that the deputy that relieved us, while he was standing outside of the apartment, was just kind of looking around and happened to see a gun tucked kind of under some bushes by a stairwell, I believe. And so they were able to recover that for evidence.
That gun ended up being a .357 Magnum that had 2 rounds still inside the chamber that were expended. It was also blood on the barrel of that gun.
Authorities send samples of the blood to the lab for DNA testing. Kara's autopsy provides other important pieces of evidence.
And the medical examiner confirms that she passed away from a gunshot wound to her cheek. They were able to retrieve a bullet from her, and now that bullet can be compared to the weapon that was recovered from the scene.
The medical examiner also finds gunpowder marks on Kara's skin.
They were able to determine that this was a close-range gunshot wound where the gun was literally pressed against her face. What this was able to tell detectives is this killer didn't shoot from across the room. This killer walked into this apartment, walked across the apartment, navigated through and into this bedroom, and shot Kara.
That means either Matthew's memory is incorrect or he's not telling the truth. Unfortunately, he's still sedated after surgery, so they'll have to wait to question him further. Instead, detectives have another talk with the witness who confirmed his story.
So they bring back in the first 911 caller, who was the young lady who was dating Matthew's brother.
It was decided at that time that they would try to get some clarification on those things that were not, the pieces weren't fitting together the same way.
When she learns about Kara's death, the woman suddenly changes her statement.
She now says Matthew had a gun that evening. It was a revolver. That's also key because that was found outside. Says he was planning to fire it off that evening for the New Year's Eve celebration. She also said that he was playing around with it while in the apartment, making it go click by pulling the trigger. So the story that she's telling detectives at this point is that she's sitting on her couch, Kara and Matthew are also in there, and then they go to the back bedroom. She says she hears a boom, and then she runs upstairs to her grandmother's apartment. And that's when they call police. But detectives at this point aren't falling for it anymore. They confront her again and tell her, your grandmother already came off the truth and told us that Matthew was the first person there. And they confront her with this information.
Clearly shaken, the woman revises her story yet again.
This story now is that she hears the gunshot and Matthew calls for help. She goes in and Matthew says, I accidentally shot Makira while I was playing with my gun. Matthew then says, call the police and tell them somebody ran in here and shot us. He then shoots himself in the shoulder. And she says, that's when I called 911. Detectives aren't stupid. They know something's off with this. They tell her, look, it's up. If you're not gonna be honest with us, we're gonna charge you with accessory to murder.
Finally, the witness decides to come clean. She admits that she's been lying to protect Matthew because she's afraid of what he might do if she doesn't.
She tells him, I'm scared because Matthew is involved in criminal activity. The gang stuff, the stop snitching stuff, I'm scared. She tells him that most of what she had been saying was true, but there were key details that she was leaving out because she was in fear. And she tells the full story of what happened and how it went down.
Welcome to all childhood. He's not in a world where he has a lot of positive relationships. He's not in a world where he is being groomed and trained on how to deal with conflict and how you deal with that in a healthy way. So he's kind of left up to his own devices, and his own devices was guns and anger. That's part of who he is and how he shows up in our world.
Now claims that Matthew Du Bois is the one who shot Makira Sanders and says it all started over jealousy.
She tells him that Matthew and Makira got into an argument about a social media app that Makira had gotten a message on. Matthew had been accusing her of cheating, and this grows and escalates, and they go into this back bedroom. She says she hears this argument going on, and then the loud bang.
The woman tells investigators Matthew shot himself, then ran out of the apartment with the gun. She doesn't know what he did with it after that.
Was this a jealous boyfriend? Was this rage? Was this truly an accident? That's what detectives have to now figure out, because they've kind of pieced this story together where it looks like Matthew is the killer, and he did this. Why did he do it is now the question.
But to get answers to these questions, investigators will have to get Matthew to talk.
Matthew is at the hospital recovering from surgery, and detectives go back to re-interview him. He does not know Makira has passed away at this point. When they start to interview him, he's given very short answers, asking him questions like, what happened? I got shot. Where did it happen? My apartment.
His next answer is a stunner.
Who were you with? My girl, that bitch. Who calls a girl that you're with that bitch at that moment? Normally not a victim. Detectives confront him with this information that they have and tell him to stop with the lying, stop with the drama that you're giving us, because we know what happened. We've gotten more information while you have been in the hospital. And Matthew says, okay, we were in an argument, we got into some pushing and shoving, and it was over some social media stuff because I thought she was cheating on me.
According to Matthew, the message was from Makira's ex-boyfriend. He says he didn't tell them about it earlier because he knew it would make him look guilty.
Matthew claims that this argument got heated and he went to cool off because he asked her to leave and she wouldn't leave. And while he was in the process of cooling off, he hears this gunshot and he sees this 5'8" guy with this blue bandana from a possible rival gang running out of the apartment. And that's the story that he's choosing to stick with at this point.
But detectives have several reasons to believe Matthew is lying. One of them is the fact that at no point during their questioning does he bother to ask about Micaiah.
That's not normal. That's not what a normal person in a situation like that does. Normally a person says, well, how are they? What's going on? In this scenario, Matthew doesn't know that his girlfriend is dead, but he does know that she was injured severely, and he doesn't ask how she is.
Micaiah's loved ones don't believe his story either. They tell detectives she never would have cheated on Matthew. But he was right about one thing. She wanted out of the relationship.
It was like a roller coaster, and she was coming down. She wanted to get away from the lifestyle that she had created with the relationship with Matthew. It was just becoming too much for her. She wasn't satisfied or happy anymore, and she wanted to leave.
She was aware that she was in over her head, and this was not going to be a situation she could love away, and that him changing his thoughts, patterns, behaviors, and decision was way beyond her pay grade. I just believe because of the amount of time that he had access to her, that he kind of viewed her at the end of the relationship as kind of like his possession. And when he was threatened with the possibility that he may lose something so precious to him, I think it made him make some decisions and choices about if or how that was going to happen.
Given their history, it's easy to see how a message from Micaiah's ex on New Year's Eve could have pushed Matthew to a vengeful place.
Just the intention of leaving him was going to be a problem. But then for him to find out that what he believes the reason is that you want to leave now is another boy, oh, that definitely set him off.
But Micaiah wasn't even interested in the other guy.
The message was just a general message of invitation to a New Year's Eve gathering from one of her other young male friends. They had started arguing about it. Because you have to also understand, too, he was tethered to his home. He was on home detention. So he didn't have the freedom to get up and move around and be social on this day. He felt like he was losing her. And I feel like in the midst of that conflict that he did what he knows how to do, and he reverted back to his normal, unnatural behavior, and that is to use violence with conflict resolution. And through the course of that argument, Matthew stopped using his words to resolve this conflict and picked up his gun and shot my daughter in the face.
The question is, will prosecutors be able to prove it? After Micaiah Sanders was shot to death, forensic results on the evidence collected comes back from the lab.
They were able to get the forensic evidence that was needed, matching the blood that was on the gun to Micaiah. They were also able to match that slug that was recovered from her to the .357 that was recovered at the scene.
Although Matthew's prints are not on the gun, prosecutors believe he's the one who fired it.
By the time the first 48 hours was up, they had a case for second-degree murder against Matthew. And they handcuffed him to his hospital bed and charged him. So he went from Harborview to the juvenile.
Witness testimony and forensic evidence gives prosecutors a strong case against Matthew Du Bois. They informed the court they plan to try him as an adult, despite the fact that he was only 16 at the time of the shooting. Micaiah's mother, Zakiya Sanders, attends every preliminary hearing.
There were court dates where I saw Matthew, and I was very conflicted when I saw Matthew. Part of me wanted to nail him to the cross like the monster he had shown me he was, and then the other part of me was a parent. I understood in parenthood that when you don't parent your children to a certain degree, they're not capable of certain things. And so I knew that a lot of these things that were aspects surrounding the murder, like carrying guns, hanging out on the streets, having conflicts, and using guns for conflict resolution, he had kind of been familiar with and used to. And that was really unfortunate for a child to be involved in such things.
Matthew faces the possibility of spending the rest of his life in jail, but the case never goes to trial.
Behind the scenes, the prosecutor was talking to the defense attorneys. They were evaluating the nature of the witnesses that were present, the forensic information that was present. After several months of negotiation behind closed doors and several hearings that were continued, Matthew entered a plea agreement. He entered what's called an Alford plea. An Alford plea essentially says that while I believe I am innocent, I believe the facts are such that a jury would likely find me guilty. I think that an Alford plea would be difficult for any victim to actually hear in a case, principally because you want to hear somebody admit or acknowledge that they did it or be convicted by a jury.
Matthew took an Alford plea against my wishes and the family's wishes. And as the parent, that was a slap in my face because I wanted to hear the details. I wanted to understand how it came to murder. There's been so many different stories said, so many he said, she said, and even after reading Discovery, only have a general idea of kind of what happened. But I wanted to know the fine details. I wanted to know what was the last conversation like, what was she talking about, and things like that.
Despite the deal, Matthew still faces up to 22 years in prison. On October 17, 2011, he goes before a judge for sentencing. The defense acknowledges that Matthew killed Micaiah, but insists it was an accident.
I think that he probably had went through her phone. They was arguing with the phone. The gun was somewhere nearby. He grabbed it, was like, you know, acting or whatever, trying to intimidate her, because I heard the girl that was in the house say that she heard her say, stop playing, and then boom, the gun went off.
Prosecutors still believe it was an act of revenge.
All of this started with a MySpace post. A MySpace post in which another young man actually invited Micaiah to hang out on New Year's Eve with him instead of Matthew. The state's theory ultimately was that Matthew became enraged and he did something that was unspeakable. He shot her. And then he shot himself to try to cover it up.
I don't know that I ever thought that I would hear that MySpace would ever be the reason that a young person lost their life.
Matthew is sentenced to 13 years and 9 months. He is released after serving just 10 years.
That was another slap in the face because I at least wanted him to do, at the least amount, the age that she was at when he took her, and that was 15 years. Plus, this was not his first felony. 13 3/4 was just not justice. It didn't make you feel like you received justice. You just kind of take it so that you can somewhat move on with your life and have a little bit of closure.
Anytime a young person is charged with a crime and found guilty and a sentence is imposed, I think that we all need to look in the mirror. And we all need to reflect upon how we got to that place and how our system failed. He took something that he could never give back and never fully repay.
I have tons of pictures of Micaiah, and so I look at them and wonder where she would be if she was able to spend the rest of her life pursuing her goals, and who she would have been. What choices would she have made? You know, singing and just being artistic was really a passion of hers. Would she have become a singer? You know, would she have been maybe a songwriter? Like, what experiences would she have taken from her youth to become the adult that she was destined to be? So yes, I think about Micaiah all the time.
I love her, and I will always speak life into her, and her legacy will never die as long as there's breath in my body.
Every aspect of your life is changed when someone this close to you is murdered. You do not figure out until they are gone the void spaces that they leave behind.
He wanted revenge.
When you have a woman who's done everything kind for you, and then you end up taking her life, there aren't any words for that.
It's a rude awakening to realize that there really is evil out there, truly evil.
He's a basketball player too as well, being this big giant of a man, but he was literally a teddy bear. Everybody liked him.
I heard about 5 to 7 gunshots. Pop, 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 pop.
They weren't sure if he was gonna survive.
I don't care how big this dude is, this isn't gonna be good.
Witnesses told us about the fight that happened at the club.
We knew right off the bat, he was pissed.
He was hell-bent on revenge.
He was waiting for the perfect opportunity, and he seized it.
To tourists, Jacksonville, Florida is known for beaches, palm trees, and year-round warm weather. But for locals, it's something else that makes the city special.
In Jacksonville, you only have one professional team. So with that being said, it's not like you have a basketball team that you can also root for. It's just the Jacks here. There's not like there's this huge college team here. When you are in Jacksonville, you are going to be a Jags fan.
Football season is barely underway on Tuesday, September 2nd, 2008, when the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office gets a frantic call just before 3 a.m.
I called 911 and I told them that somebody's been shot, he's a football player.
The victim was Richard Collier, was an NFL football player for the Jaguars.
The caller, Natalia Corby, reports that Richard was shot in his Escalade while parked outside her mother's apartment, where she now waits with her sister and another friend.
They're all waiting inside of the house because they don't know if that shooter is still out there. At this point, it's an active shooter situation. They have no clue if Richard is even dead or alive at this point.
Natalia urges the operator to send help quickly.
All of us were just in shock and, kind of pacing and crying. We're trying to figure out what's going on. The ambulance pulled into the back. Then the police arrived and pulled into the back as well. We meet them outside. I immediately thought that he had passed away. I heard how many shots had went off, and I was like, wow, he has to be gone.
But first responders find that Richard is alive.
Mr. Collier was in the passenger seat of his own vehicle. He was unconscious, of course, and he was suffering the severe injuries.
He'd been shot numerous times. Mr. Collier was in critical condition.
I remember them taking the gurney out and putting him on there.
They immediately rushed him to the hospital to see if there's anything they can do to save him.
It was just a blur for me. I was just too busy crying and, in a state of disbelief.
Richard Collier was born on October 23, 1981, in Shreveport.
Richard Collier came from Louisiana. He comes from a very humble background.
He had a single mom. He had some sisters that were super supportive of him. He had an escape with football and basketball. He was a basketball player too.
As his love for sports grew, so did Richard. By high school, he towered over his classmates at 6 feet 7 inches.
Richard was a dreamer, and he had this drive to become this successful football player, and he wasn't going to let anything get in his way. We had some bumps along the road,
most of which came in the form of schoolwork.
His grades weren't the greatest when he was in high school, so no colleges would look at him, even though he was very athletic.
Following high school, Richard lived at home with his mom and became a working man.
He was stocking shelves at Walmart. He's doing what he's got to do.
He ended up working a regular job for a couple of years before he said, you know what, it's time for me to get serious about football again. He decided that, he was going to go to community college, get his grades back on track, and then become focused again.
He started playing football again, and then he transferred to Valdosta State, where he performed exceptionally.
It was a big football program. He excelled there. He was All-American.
In 2006, Richard caught the eye of NFL scouts. The Jaguars invited him to a post-draft camp.
He ended up becoming an undrafted free agent with the Jacksonville Jaguars. He made the team, and, he was proving himself.
His goal was to play in the NFL, and he worked his butt off to get there. He was somebody who struggled in life, and he succeeded, and he made it to the NFL.
Most people that want an NFL career, it's, you may be good at high school, you might be good at college, but it's an elite crew to be in the NFL.
Richard fit right in and took on the role of offensive tackle.
He was this big giant of a man, but he was literally a teddy bear. Everybody liked him.
There was no shortage of fun to be had off the field. In the spring of 2008, Richard enjoyed hitting the clubs, often accompanied by sisters Jamelia and Natalia Corby.
When I met Richard Collier, I was with my sister Natalia. We were having fun, just drinking. Eventually, I think he came and spoke to me, and we exchanged numbers. We went clubbing, that was our thing. We'd go to bars, stuff like that. Go to the beach, just, partying. He was very sweet, very nice, friendly. He would talk about his family a lot. I loved that about him.
Jamelia and Richard dated casually.
I don't watch football. I didn't know who he was. It's been like a couple months, and I didn't hear from him as much, and I thought he was ghosting me, so I was sending him all kind of messages. He's like, I was in training camp. He said he couldn't call during training camp because they weren't allowed to have their phones. That's when I found out he played football.
Richard liked to have fun, but he kept his head in the game.
He's being responsible. And, his family, he was trying to take care of his family. He's a good guy.
He had been in Jacksonville for approximately 3 years. He had worked really hard to accomplish this dream.
But Richard's third season with the Jags ends before it begins. As Richard is rushed to the hospital with multiple gunshot wounds, detectives arrive at the scene. They find Jamelia and Natalia Corby, as well as Richard's teammate, Kenneth Petway.
We're a few hours from daylight. I knew we'd get a better look at the scene after the interview, but we knew we had to go at them for the story. They were very emotional. They were scared.
They separate me and my sister. They put us both in separate cop cars, and they take us to the station.
We transported the sisters separate just to keep their statements in their truest forms and uninfluenced by each other, because people will fill in the blanks for each other.
Kenneth Petway remains on the scene and speaks with detectives.
Kenny was good friends with Mr. Collier and was in the car when the shooting occurred, but then ran into the apartment immediately after.
Kenny is losing his mind. He is frantic. He's very emotional. He thought he was gonna die.
While detectives give Kenny time to calm down, they take in the scene.
I remember seeing the red Escalade that Mr. Collier was in at the time of the shooting. I believe it was still running, the lights were on.
The rear passenger door is open. You can see bullet holes going through the seat where Mr. Collier was.
Mr. Collier was in the front passenger seat. and the driver's side rear door was left open by one of the females when she exited the car to go inside. And it seems like the suspect came up and shot through that open door, through the back of the seats into Mr. Collier.
You see casings out on the ground. We had 6 or 7 casings at the scene.
They are grouped close together, offering up a clue.
More than likely, with the proximity of everything, the closeness of it, we knew we had one shooter. The shell casings were 45 caliber. You know, 45 caliber is a very large handgun round.
Between the caliber and the number of shots fired, detectives are concerned about Richard's chances at survival.
I didn't think he was going to make it. I thought this was going to be a homicide, especially when I knew the caliber, you know, at the scene was a 45. I knew how many gunshot wounds he had. I don't care how big this dude is, this isn't going to be good.
In the early morning hours of September 2nd, 2008, Jacksonville Jaguars offensive tackle Richard Collier undergoes emergency surgery at Shands Hospital.
He wasn't expected to make it. His body had multiple gunshot wounds. It was going to be a long surgery, and it was going to be a long recovery or time before we can get to speak to him in person, if he even makes it.
Back at the scene, Detective Dennis Sullivan interviews Kenny Petway, the man who was inside the car when Richard was shot.
So as part of this investigation, they had to rule out Kenny Petway to make sure that he wasn't being targeted and also making sure he wasn't involved in the case in any way.
According to Kenny, Richard reached out to him earlier in the evening, knowing he'd just received bad news.
Kenny was feeling down from just getting cut from the team. So Richard decided, hey, let's get out and have a good time and go to the club. So he invited his friends, Jamelia and Natalia, to go with them to the club that night.
Kenny says they met up with some other teammates at the Square One Club.
They were just having a good time. They were all hanging out that evening.
By 2 a.m., the party was winding down.
All 4 of them decide that, hey, it's time to go home. So they leave 30 minutes before the club lets out, and they're on their way. Richard and Kenny, they're in one vehicle. Kenny's driving. They're following the Corby sisters home to the Riverside neighborhood.
Kenny Petway was driving Richard's car because Richard had a DUI not too long ago, and he was trying to make sure that, you know, he didn't, you know, he's being responsible.
As they followed, Kenny says Jamelia appeared to lose her way.
Petway had actually indicated that they were driving around in circles like they didn't know where they were going.
The detail is a red flag for detectives.
It's not strange getting lost. However, when it's leading up to a shooting, we were suspicious of that at that time. It almost felt like they were trying to find a good location to set the victims up.
Kenny says they finally arrived at the apartment complex where the sisters were staying with their mother. He followed Jamelia into a back parking lot.
Collier's truck, driven by Petway, drives up through the alleyway and parks in the back where the residents park at. The girls get out.
The group decides that they're going to split because Natalia has to go to work in the morning, but Jamelia and Richard still want to hang out. Natalia goes inside and she's like, listen, I'm going to bed. Jamelia is about to get into the SUV with Richard and Kenny. She opens the door, but then she realizes that she needs to freshen up before she gets back into the car. So she goes inside of the apartment after Natalia to go freshen up.
Kenny and Richard wait in the vehicle for Jamelia to return. But before she does, an ambush.
Shots ring out, multiple shots. This sounds like a cannon going off.
Kenny didn't see anything.
When you hear that many bullets being fired off, most people, then the instinct is to, put your head down. Mr. Petway didn't see who the shooter was, but then of course he saw his friend injured, and then went to try to get help.
He told us he ended up going to the entranceway to the Corby's apartment.
Kenny, he's banging on the door saying to call 911 and that Richard's been shot. Natalia is the one that ends up making that call.
Kenny was also upset that he didn't see or do anything. I pretty much eliminated him as probably a person involved. You know, if he got out, went over and shot Richard, didn't really think that. He was really shook.
Detectives are trying to figure out what could have possibly happened here. Could it have been a robbery?
I didn't really suspect it to be a robbery because from all intents and purposes, I think we had Richard's personal items, effects, cards, money, and there was no attempt to, you know, Petway was already out of the car. So there's no attempt to like pull Rich out and take the vehicle. It was a nice customized Cadillac Escalade truck.
They didn't try to take the vehicle. They didn't demand any money. They came straight to the vehicle and opened fire.
Investigators suspect the fact that Kenny escaped unscathed wasn't an accident.
You could see the grouping of the bullets, the projectiles and the entries into the seat were really pretty tight grouping, so it indicated Kenny was not a target at all. Richard Collier was the target.
It seemed like it was personal. We just didn't know why, and we had to figure that out.
Investigators head back to the station where Jamelia and Natalia Corby await questioning.
Quite honestly, the females were under a little bit of suspicion from us. I felt it was strange, them getting lost on the way home. It just seemed like they were either trying to buy time or, who knows, set up a shooting at a different location. So we were looking at that pretty hard at the time.
There was a question like, could this be a lover's triangle or some sort of crime of passion?
Following the shooting of Jacksonville Jaguars football player Richard Collier, investigators head to the station to interview the two women who were with him moments before the shots rang out.
Jamelia, out of the two sisters, was the more priority to interview. We knew Jamelia was more involved with Richard. She was supposed to go with them afterwards. Her sister wasn't.
I kept asking, if he was okay, if he's all right. They wouldn't tell me.
It was a heated interview at times. You want to be as compassionate as you can, but you can't patty cake with them. All I'm looking for is the truth.
They asked me all kind of questions like, have I thought about killing someone before? Did I want him dead? Would I hurt him? I was getting that kind of feeling. We were like suspects, not witnesses. I couldn't believe it happened. It was kind of traumatic for me. And, I liked him a lot. And it was just hard to deal with. I'm sorry.
Detectives confront her about getting lost.
I just moved to my mother's house for a week or two until my apartment was ready. So I didn't know, the area too well. I also required glasses to drive, and I didn't wear them. I was trying to be cute. I didn't wear my glasses. So I got a little turned around trying to get onto the highway.
It can be easy to, get turned around from San Marco to go to Riverside. She goes, we left. Basically, we started driving around in circles. We kind of got lost for a minute, and she explained it, and I could tell her tone was genuine.
I was like, let me go ahead and freshen up. I had been drinking, dancing, and I had to, use the restroom. So I was like, let me go inside and freshen up. So I get up, and then I go to the door, and I heard gunshots. About 5 to 7. Pop, 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 pop.
Immediately after the gunshot stopped, they hear a banging on the door, and it's Kenny. He's banging on the door, saying to call 911 and that Richard's been shot.
Detectives believe that Jamelia is telling the truth.
She said the things I expected her to say, and that I would expect somebody innocent and not setting it up per se.
Investigators speak with her sister, Natalia, in another room.
I've never been interrogated, and I didn't know what was going on. I didn't even know if Richard was still alive at this point.
She pretty much says the same thing, that they were at the club. But one thing Natalia did say that was a little different was that there was this man that kept staring at Richard pretty much the entire night.
I do remember seeing a guy. I saw him a couple times throughout the night. The last time I noticed him is outside the club. It did seem like he was kind of focused on where we were at. I just thought it was weird.
That was kind of something that concerned us. We would want to see who was maybe following them.
After hours of interrogation, Natalia and Jamelia are allowed to leave. As day breaks, the shooting makes big headlines.
The news hit, instantly. Everyone was talking about it first thing in the morning.
This is a story that blew up nationwide. You have a professional football player, Jacksonville Jaguar, that has been shot multiple times.
This made big news. Was getting contacted by the New York Times. ESPN was all over that.
And Richard Collier is still fighting for his life.
They weren't sure if he was going to survive.
I had an officer staying there with him the whole time. He was intubated, so we knew he wouldn't be able to speak if he gained consciousness, and it was going to be a long recovery or time before we can get to speak to him in person, if he even makes it.
On the morning of September 2nd, 2008, Jaguars football player Richard Collier remains in critical condition. Richard was shot multiple times following a night on the town with friends.
Law enforcement wanted to investigate whether or not something had just happened at the club that would have caused someone to do this shooting.
To find out, they place a follow-up phone call to Kenny Petway. Kenny says he just heard from one of Richard's exes, who had also been at the club. She told Kenny about a conversation she had with Richard that night.
The ex-girlfriend walks up to Richard in the club and says, hey, there's this guy that keeps staring at you here in the club. So Richard says he does remember the guy from several months back and getting into a fight with him, and he didn't think much of it.
If Richard got into a fight, investigators want to know with who.
That was a good place to start for us.
One of the things that law enforcement will do is they'll start, going through their database. Are there any previous cases where the victim was involved in anything that could lead them to a potential suspect?
My partner finds a report on one of our searchable databases where a man had a run-in with a Jaguar player, and he only knew him as Big Rich. We don't know who Big Rich is.
Could Big Rich be Richard Collier?
Richard Collier was 6'7", 340, 350 pounds. They were able to verify that Richard's nickname was, in fact, Big Rich.
We immediately knew this was something. We're all looking at it. And in the report, so this guy is at a club. He gets into an altercation with Richard Collier. He goes home, but then he decides to come down to the police memorial building. So this, we knew right off the bat, this dude was pissed.
The man who filed the complaint is 32-year-old Tyrone Hartsfield.
He states that he's in the club, minding his own business, and this guy, this big dude, bumps into him and then attacks him.
But according to the report, investigators later determined that wasn't what happened.
Turns out a drink had gotten inadvertently spilled on him. It got into a pushing match. And Richard, in self-defense, put one on Tyrone Hartsfield. Down goes Frazier, and the game's over.
The police determined that Richard Collier hadn't done anything wrong, and all he was doing was defending himself.
Nothing was ever done. The case was dropped.
Detectives look into Tyrone's background.
When I ran his name, he had a history. He's a very active and successful drug dealer up on the north side of our town. It's a very violent area.
Mr. Hartsfield had 6 felony convictions, but the police didn't want to just jump in and go right after him based on just this alone.
They're doing everything that they need to do to make sure that they have all of the information that they need before they go to Tyrone.
Unknowingly, Tyrone helps them get a start.
So when Mr. Hartsfield made the police report referencing the fight that he had with Mr. Collier at the club in April, he actually gave his correct phone number, which is unusual. Usually drug dealers don't like to provide their real phone number, but he did.
That honestly made the hair on our neck stand up. We were excited about that. So we ordered phone records on Tyrone Hartsfield's phone.
While they wait for the records to come in, police ask the public for help.
You have a celebrity football player being shot, and so there's a lot of public interest in the case. Going forward to the public and asking for their assistance in the investigation is important. They also announced that there was a reward of $1,000.
You also have the Jacksonville Jaguars adding to this reward, adding $10,000 because they really want answers.
We were getting tips. We started getting information from confidential sources and other people that were in the community. We started hearing that a guy named Q did the shooting. Then we found out Tyrone's nickname was Q.
So now you start looking for witnesses. The detectives went to the club. They spoke to people that worked at the club. There were other football players from the Jaguar team that were there that night. We went and spoke to those players to see if they saw anything or heard anything.
They hear from several people who were in the club that night that Tyrone Hartsfield was the man who was staring Richard Collier down.
One person that we spoke to identified Hartsfield. He knew him, told us about the fight that happened at the club a few months prior to the night of the shooting, and that Hartsfield had said that he was going to get revenge on him.
Then, almost a month after the shooting, investigators learn that Richard is awake.
Despite the serious nature of his injuries, Richard Collier was able to survive, and that's just from really good medical work they were able to put on him.
He suffered catastrophic injuries where he is essentially paralyzed from the waist down. He suffered clots in one of his legs, which caused him to have to partially amputate one of his legs.
He's had numerous infections. He's really just trying to make it through. And now he has to grapple with the fact that he will never play football again.
Detectives pay Richard a visit at the hospital. His memory from that night is hazy.
He did not see who shot him. He said he was sitting in the car and gunshots rang out.
I asked him about the fight. He said, some small dude tried me and, spilled a drink and he tried to swing on me.
Richard gave him a black eye, and he hit him ultimately because Richard was defending himself.
I had some photographs with me, and when I end up showing him photographs, he goes, that's the guy I hit right there, and he pointed him out.
Detective Sullivan shows him these pictures, and Richard IDs Tyrone as the man that he gave the black eye in the club.
It was all starting to come to a head. We had this incident, somebody he'd gotten into it with, he's at this club, and it's starting to shrink and settle in on a suspect.
In October 2008, police in Jacksonville, Florida are closing in on Tyrone Hartsfield as the main suspect in a shooting that nearly ended the life of Jaguars player Richard Collier.
Detectives have a name and they have a face, but before they confront Tyrone, they want to make sure that all of their ducks are in a row.
After weeks of waiting, Tyrone's cell phone records are in.
We got the cell site data, and it actually showed him at the club, in the same area as the club. It doesn't say he's at this address, but it pings off the cell towers that are closest and it was close to that area.
Around 2 a.m., the phone moved.
We start looking at the individuals that he had called that night. One of those individuals tells us about Stefan. Stefan Wilson was a friend of Mr. Hartsfield and was actually with him at the club.
Lo and behold, Stefan Wilson is a violent federal offender. He's done a robbery in Atlanta, and he's on probation for it.
So we get with his probation officer, and we arrange to meet him. We brought Mr. Wilson down to the police station, into the homicide office, and had a lengthy interview with him. Of course, at first he denied any knowledge of the shooting.
And then I make him think about his probation.
If he was in fact out with Mr. Hartsfield, who is a convicted felon, this could violate his probation. So he could be facing time.
He did not want to go back to prison, so he decided to cooperate.
He finally says, I'm gonna tell you what's going on. And he ends up saying, I was with him that night.
He tells them that he recalls Mr. Hartsfield seeing Mr. Collier in the club and that he was hell-bent on revenge.
Tyrone Hartsfield was waiting for the perfect opportunity. And when he saw his person that had done him wrong, he seized it.
Mr. Wolf tells law enforcement that Mr. Hartsfield was calling people to try to get a gun.
He had somebody from the north side bring it down, and apparently he got it.
They decided to step outside and wait on Mr. Collier and his party to leave. And at around 2 o'clock, when the club was closing, Mr. Collier and his party left, and that's when they followed him from the club to Riverside into the apartment complex. Hartsfield was driving. Stefan was in the passenger seat.
They watched the two cars pull into the back of the apartment complex. Tyrone parked out front.
Hartsfield told Stefan that he would be right back, and he left with a gun in hand. Stefan said a minute or two later, he hears several gunshots. Hartsfield comes back, running, told Stefan to slide over and drive. He got into the passenger seat and told him that he shot the victim, that he had gotten revenge, basically. And they drove off and left the scene.
We're like, this dude's telling the truth. It's starting to click, so you're like, oh man, we're hot and heavy on this. We get this one.
Investigators ask Stefan for help.
We ask him to wear a wire and go speak to Hartsfield about the shooting, and he agrees to do it. So Detective Sullivan and I give him a recording device.
A recording device for him to put in his pocket instead of, like, you know, the traditional wire.
That same day, Stefan meets with Tyrone Hartsfield outside Tyrone's mother's house.
Tyrone Hartsfield was pretty hesitant and nervous about saying anything. He was aware that something was possibly up.
We're not listening in real time. We were posted up hidden, and because it had taken so long, we got nervous. Detective Sullivan and I decided to do a drive-by, and Stefan was outside talking to Mr. Hartsfield. Stefan had taken his shirt off, which we thought was weird. But it turns out, when Stefan was talking to Hartsfield, Stefan told him, the police want me to be a witness against you. Stefan took his shirt off to prove he wasn't wearing a wire.
Well, man, I stripped you right like that. But ain't nothing on me, dog. I see you. Ain't nothing on me, I see you.
Thankfully, he did not have any visible evidence that he was recording.
Tyrone opens up.
They ain't got nothing on me. Anything they got on me.
He said that the police didn't have a case against him, and as long as you don't flip, then I'm good.
He also makes statements about the importance of them getting their story straight.
Before they even got you, I can do it. Like, yeah, that's what I'm saying. So if you can keep me, how did your business? I did not tell him you pulled the trigger. I did not tell him that you fought. I did not tell him that.
He never came right out and said, yes, I ran up and shot him, but he definitely said enough to indicate that he had committed the shooting, the attempted murder. That was the rest of the puzzle that we needed for our probable cause to arrest, so we immediately got an arrest warrant.
On October 18th, 2008, almost 6 weeks after Richard was shot, Tyrone is arrested by U.S. Marshals.
He's cocky and arrogant, comes in there and just, you know, I'm not gonna speak to y'all without a lawyer.
At a hearing a month after his arrest, Tyrone Hartsfield pleads not guilty. The judge orders him held without bond.
We had a definite security threat then. We were really worried about that if he got out, that Hartsfield was gonna ambush Richard Collier.
About a year later, on October 26, 2009, Tyrone Hartsfield is brought to trial for the charges of attempted murder against Mr. Collier. The state, right out the gate, in opening statements, tells the jury that this is a case about revenge.
This man had gotten beaten up by a professional football player. His ego took a huge blow. And then the community knows, word gets around that you've gotten beaten up by a Jacksonville Jaguars player. He really wanted some sort of retribution for what happened.
Seeing Richard for the first time since the incident was shocking, because now at this point he was in a wheelchair.
He's a humble individual. He's a big, imposing person, even in a wheelchair. I mean, he's a big guy.
He is able to tell the jury that he had no idea at the time who had done this shooting. He did not see the shooter, but he did tell them that he recognized Mr. Hartsfield from that previous altercation earlier that year prior to the shooting.
Stephon Wilson takes the stand.
Stephon cooperated. He wore a wire, and his agreement to wear that wire helped the case. This was some fantastic police work and prosecutorial work, and it tied Tyrone Hartsfield to the scene in terms of being at the nightclub and also to the scene where the shooting took place.
Stephon Wilson knocked it out of the park on the stand. He was very credible, he was engaging, and he was likable by the jury.
The gun wasn't found, but we have enough evidence putting Tyrone Hartsfield there. Circumstantially, with the phone records and all the other evidence, it unequivocally shows you that this person, Tyrone Hartsfield, is the person who did it.
Tyrone's defense suggests blame could be placed elsewhere.
The strategy of the defense was to point out the fact that there could have been other suspects who were upset with Mr. Collier.
They point to several people, including the Corby sisters.
We went and testified, and the defense attorney, she was just trying to make us look bad, trying to make us look like, you know, trying to trip us up, make us look like liars.
The sisters don't waver.
We didn't have anything to do with it whatsoever. We were just there that night.
Tyrone takes the stand in his own defense.
He cried through most of his testimony. He talked about being wrong at the nightclub when Richard Collier hurt him, and yeah, he was mad about it and all that, but you know, he would never resort to this. He just kept on going and going, trying to get sympathy.
He gets none from the jury.
We got a verdict in like 3 hours, and he's found guilty.
Mr. Hartsfield was sentenced to life in prison as a habitual offender. After Mr. Hartsfield was sentenced to life in prison, he obviously appealed. And for many years, those appeals have been denied. However, it appears at some point there was a decision by prosecutors and in conjunction with the victim to come to a negotiated resolution or a plea deal to have some finality in the case.
Part of the resentencing was him admitting that he did it, and he did go from life to 27 years, I believe.
He's gonna always tell you, I'm cool, I got the swag.
I could not have asked for a better father for my daughter. And for his life to end the way it did, it was just horrific.
All of our dreams at one time was to make it to the NFL, but life don't always happen that way, My brother meant the world to me. Anybody I love meant the world to me, and he was the same way. Jabbar was.
Broad daylight on a summer afternoon, somebody's gunned down.
There's a young black man laying in a pool of his own blood, fighting for his life.
He certainly couldn't talk, but he's trying to write something on his arm in his own blood.
There was a lot of information coming in. The name kept coming up.
It's what police sometimes call a street name.
Every time they see each other, they're at each other's necks, like two boxers in a ring.
Somebody was going to be hurt or killed.
As a young man, there's this need to defend and protect your territory.
He wasn't going to allow him to breathe another day.
It's June 5th, 1995. A quiet summer afternoon in Colorado Springs, Colorado.
Colorado Springs back in the 1990s was a nice little town, not a whole lot of crime.
It's just a normal day where, everybody's kind of tending their business, commuting, routine type day.
Just after 3:30 p.m., the routine is interrupted.
There was a flood of 911 calls coming in, reporting a shooting.
There was a black man who got shot right in front of the Champion auto parts store right there by the front door.
The area where this happened was a nice part of town.
Usually where people feel really safe, the last thing they're thinking is that they're going to be a witness to serious gun violence.
Patrol officers with Colorado Springs Police Department arrive at the location.
There's a young black man laying in a pool of his own blood, and he is fighting for his life.
There were several witnesses that heard the gunshots or even saw what happened, rushed over to render aid.
Our victim was laying on the ground, was still alive at the time, trying to breathe. He's gasping for air.
And then the EMTs arrived, and of course they put him on a gurney and they took him, I think, to Memorial Hospital.
When I got there, I could see that the area was cordoned off with police evidence tape. I interviewed a few people. They heard the shots, which happened right outside the front door to the west of the Champion Auto Parts store. They observed two black males. One had a gun and basically shot the other one a number of times. And then this individual ran to the north and disappeared. And no one could give me a good description other than a young, possibly around 20-year-old black male with a white shirt on.
With the shooter at large, police immediately launch a search.
There were only like 3 little businesses in this short strip mall. Moving past those businesses, the next location would be an apartment complex, fairly large complex to the north, and that's apparently where the suspect kind of disappeared. So of course we searched that area. We actually used a dog. We had a canine officer come.
At the scene, a man pulls into the parking lot and asks to speak with the detectives.
He was driving by the auto parts store, saw all the police activity there, and noticed that his brother's car was parked in the parking lot with police tape around it.
He begins to talk to police, and he's saying, "Hey, that's my brother's car."
I got a phone call from one of my cousins, and he said there's a lot of police at the auto parts store, and he thinks something happened to Jabbar. And so I rushed over there. They wouldn't tell me nothing. No, but I knew in my heart that it was Jabbar.
Antoine Jabbar McKenzie was born on January 15, 1975, in Colorado Springs.
Jabbar was one of 3. He was the baby of the family, and he grew up with this close-knit family with his siblings.
We got a pretty big family. We all grew up together, the whole block. We had my aunt and uncle on the corner. My Uncle Larry stayed next door to them. My cousin Kelly and Junior stayed a house down from them. And then on the other street, we had cousins.
Jabbar and his brothers were inseparable.
We was always together. If you seen one, you seen us all. I remember one time we all snuck off from B Street and walked all the way to the mountains over there, followed the creek all the way up to the mountains. And we made it home. It was a little dark. And my mom, they was like, "Where was y'all at?" We went to the mountains. And Jabbar was like, "Yeah, Mom, I'm tired." My dad and Mom took us fishing. We did a lot of fishing, camping. They always made sure my mom would always take us fishing, you know. And I remember there was a time too, Jabbar, we was fishing and he sat on the hook. And my mom had to take him to the hospital because it couldn't get it out.
When Jabbar was 17, his parents separated.
I was 20 at the time. They said they stayed together to raise us so we'd be together.
They did this until the point where they figured that the kids could be on their own, make their own decisions, and they would be good. And it was at that point where Mom and Dad separated. Mom went to live in Texas. Dad stayed here in Colorado.
Jabbar stayed in Colorado Springs, where he attended Palmer High School.
Jabbar had a love for football. You know, he was real passionate about it. You start getting that recognition that people start noticing you and you start feeling good about yourself. Your self-esteem gets good. So I think he was enjoying that.
He played tackle in high school and guard, and he was pretty good. All of our dreams at one time was to make it to the NFL, but life don't always happen that way.
Unfortunately, he dropped out of school in his senior year. Some people, that came as a surprise to him because he was such a good football player and enjoyed it. But all of a sudden, he decides to drop out of school.
Jabbar took a job working with his father, who owned a construction company.
They pour concrete, and my dad taught him how to operate equipment. Basically, hard labor, that's what we do.
Jabbar eventually moved in with his grandma. And it was at that point where he walked in his independence. He was paying bills. He was the man in the house.
With hard-earned cash in his pocket, Jabbar splurged and bought himself a vintage muscle car.
He worked tirelessly in order to pay that thing off. He would continue to fix it up to get it just right.
I remember one day, I said, "I'm gonna get my car painted." I said, we gonna sand it, you know, this. And so we didn't know what we was doing. So by the end of it, we had all kinds of grind marks all over the car and everything. And he was like, "Man, we messed this car up."
Jabbar had plans to take the car on a road trip.
The whole plan for us leaving, my cousin got him a job at the prison to be a prison guard. So he was gonna go to Texas to be a prison guard.
But on the day he planned to leave, his brother, Eric, is in the parking lot of an auto parts store trying to find out if the man who was just shot is Jabbar.
The victim's brother talks to police and says, this could be my brother. I see his car.
He was told then that the person that was associated with that car had been shot and transported to the hospital.
The brother, understandably, is very, freaked out and rushes right to the hospital.
Investigators continue to speak to witnesses. They learn that the shooter might not be on foot after all.
There's a witness on the scene who was across the street filling up his truck at a gas station, heard what he thought was a backfire, looks over and he sees this guy pointing at our victim, and he hears a succession of 6 gunshots, and then sees our victim fall to the ground. He looks down the street and sees the person he saw confronting our victim, running down the street and get into the passenger side of a white car.
It had no hubcaps and was being driven by a black male, and it was like spinning out.
The suspect got into the passenger side of that car and they left the area.
Investigators stay on the lookout for the white sedan. Then, detectives learn from witnesses who tried to render him aid that the victim might have tried to leave a clue.
He certainly couldn't talk, but he's bleeding pretty badly, and he's trying to write something on his arm in his own blood.
With the last strength that he has, he is trying to tell people what happened to him.
It clearly indicated that he knew and he was trying to put that information out.
Midday shooting in Colorado Springs has left a young man suspected to be 20-year-old Jabbar McKenzie at a nearby hospital fighting for his life. Speaking with witnesses, investigators learned the victim may have attempted to communicate a clue about the shooter before losing consciousness.
He is hit and he falls to the ground. There's a lot of blood, and bystanders run to him to help him. And he tries to write something on his arm. He writes with his own blood.
When we find out that that's happened, we call the hospital. We want to see what it is.
They learn they will have to wait until after he undergoes emergency surgery.
So from there, my next assignment would be to do the scene itself. So I started having the scene photographed. That's kind of the first thing you do.
There was a car parked in the parking lot that ended up belonging to our victim, and that's why he had gone to the auto parts store to get the thermostat.
We started noticing what appeared to be .22 caliber spent casings. We collected 10 of those casings. Some of them were toward the driver's side of the vehicle, some were at the rear of the vehicle, and some were actually on the passenger side of the vehicle. So it appeared as though whoever was firing, they must have fired fairly close to the individual, and then as they backed up away, they continued firing. Therefore, the casings were, strewn around the car, and then apparently ran to the north.
Investigators also locate some cash and the thermostat on the ground.
So it certainly appeared that the individual, the victim in this case, had been in the store, probably purchased the thermostat, and on the way to his car was confronted by this black individual with the white shirt.
Well, it was apparent it wasn't a robbery because he still had money in his hand, and he had an auto part, a thermostat that he had purchased. So you're looking at this and, your thoughts are, well, what happened here? This wasn't a robbery. This was a targeted attack. Broad daylight on a summer afternoon in the middle of a parking lot, somebody's gunned down. This was some kind of a hit.
If the young man did see who attacked him, investigators learn he won't be able to share that with police.
Jabbar McKenzie is pronounced dead at 3:50 p.m. He sustained 6 gunshot wounds to the chest. One of those gunshots went through his heart and another through his lungs.
Investigators head to the hospital, hopeful to take a look at the victim's arm.
By the time we get there speared, we can't make anything out. But the one witness that saw the shooting says he saw, it looked like it was either a J or a K or O.
Having gotten word of the shooting from Eric, Jabbar McKenzie's family gathers at the hospital.
A man and an elderly lady show up to the hospital, and they're saying, we want to see our son. And it's at that time that they're notified that, well, the person that was brought in is deceased, is no longer alive.
A family member had made an identification of the body, and it was Jabbar McKenzie.
The day that he passed away, we were supposed to leave that day. My brother meant the world to me. Anybody I love meant the world to me, and I go out to wait for him if I have to. And he was the same way. Jabbar was.
Mr. McKenzie loses it. His son is now gone. His son is dead. Anybody would have that reaction.
He said that you know, he wants to know what's going on, and he knows who did this, and he's going to get him, and the detective's trying to calm him down and say, you know, that's not the way to handle this. You don't let us handle this. And Everett walks out of the room. Well, Viola, the Joe Barr's grandmother's still there, so detectives start talking to her and trying to find out some background on Joe Barr.
Grandma told police that Jabbar, he didn't get into a lot of trouble. He didn't hang out with any gangs. According to Grandma, he was just a sweet young man.
Everett McKenzie comes back into the room. He's calmed down now and would like to help out however he can to find out who did this to his son. He said that that Joe Barr had been having troubles for years, ever since high school, with a kid named Kelvin Washington. And he felt that maybe Kelvin was involved in the shooting.
Detectives learned that 19-year-old Kelvin Andre Washington lives a few blocks from the crime scene on Tahoe Boulevard.
Now we need to go talk to Kelvin Washington to find out what can he tell us about this homicide. Was he involved in this?
Colorado Springs at the time, I think, is probably maybe 320,000 folks. It was a big little town, and every homicide still impacted the community. Back in 1995, there was not a large number of homicides in Colorado Springs. This was the 7th homicide in 1995, and it was in the middle of June. This murder occurred in the middle of the day at an auto parts store. It could have been at a grocery store. It could have been at the mall. And that's the kind of thing that Colorado Springs at the time would still be paying attention to. The people in town would want to know, is this going to impact them? Is there something going on in town that could be dangerous?
After 20-year-old Jabbar McKenzie is brazenly shot down in broad daylight, investigators look into an alleged enemy from his days at Palmer High.
I ended up at around 9 o'clock, like 6 hours after the shooting, going to the Tahoe address where we thought we could find Kelvin Washington. And there were a number of other people in the living room area, and one of them was Kelvin Washington. So it wasn't comfortable to be talking to him with all these people. So we traveled to the basement with him and started learning a few things.
His reaction kind of surprised the detectives because he says, I thought you'd be coming by here to talk to me. Oh, really? You're going to tell us you were involved in this? What's going on? And he says, no, I'll tell you, it's common knowledge on the street that myself and Joe Barr do not get along. But I did not kill Joe Barr. He's a typical 20-year-old, wears glasses, and seems to be an all-around kind of guy, I'm here to help you out. I wasn't involved in this. The detectives asked him, well, would you come down to town and talk to us about this? It's better than, us having to talk to you here at your house. Sure. He was very cooperative. He said, I'll meet you guys down there.
At the station, police asked Kelvin to submit to a GSR test.
The gunshot residue test is where police can swab someone's hands and determine they could be the shooter. Kelvin agrees to do that.
While police process the results, Kelvin gives a statement about his history with Jabbar.
He's being very polite, very cooperative, answering all of their questions.
Kelvin says the conflict started when they were both still in high school.
It sounds like Kelvin's girlfriend may have hit on Jabbar. And through that, Jabbar went and talked to Kelvin about it.
Jabbar went to Kelvin to tell him, hey, man, your girlfriend is hitting on me. You might want to watch her. When Kelvin confronts his girlfriend about what Jabbar was saying, she denies it. And this makes Kelvin upset. He goes back to Jabbar and says, hey, man, stay out of my relationship. I don't want to have anything else to do with you. You stay away from me, you stay away from her. Jabbar was not one to back down from a threat. And he saw this as a threat. And so now Kelvin becomes an enemy.
So what started as high school rivalry quickly escalated to an incident where Jabbar showed up at Kelvin's house to fight him.
Kelvin Washington's mom came out on the front porch and had to tell Jabbar, leave. I don't want you around here messing with my son. He doesn't want to fight you. Get out of here. And Jabbar leaves.
It escalated to the point where Kelvin says that Jabbar started bullying him. He started throwing bricks at his car. We have 2 teenage boys here, and they are feuding. Every time they see each other in school, they're at each other's necks, like 2 boxers in a ring.
It's clear the 2 young men didn't like each other. But is a high school beef motive for murder?
In order to arrest someone, there's 3 basic elements that you have to establish. A motive, an opportunity, and the means to commit the crime.
With motive in question, investigators focus on opportunity.
First thing I wanted to do was kind of track his day. What did you do today?
Kelvin says that he was living with his girlfriend and their baby at the time. He woke up, he played some video games that morning, and around 12:30, he left the house to go pick up his green Cadillac. Police think this is a really important detail because the car observed at the shooting was a white sedan, not a green Cadillac.
Kelvin says he spent the afternoon at his stepfather's house on Tahoe Boulevard, where he still was when the shooting took place.
Kelvin also tells police that his family was in and out of the house all day, and this would help confirm Kelvin's alibi because they would have seen Kelvin in the house.
Detectives consider whether Kelvin had the means to commit the crime.
One of the questions they ask is, do you own a gun? Kelvin says, yes, I do.
This is Colorado. This is the Wild West, so to speak. Lots of people own guns in Colorado Springs, so it's not unusual for a 20-year-old to own a gun.
But it's a .380, which again is not the murder weapon. He agrees to actually give the police his own gun if they want to test it and compare it to that .22 caliber shell casing they found. Kelvin is calm, he is agreeing to cooperate, and police often view that kind of demeanor as someone who's not guilty, who is just trying to show that they're innocent.
But just before Kelvin Washington leaves, the results of his GSR test come back.
Detective Hilty came into the room and informed me and in front of Mr. Washington that he came back positive for gunshot residue. I asked him how he was going to explain that. How do you explain you have gunshot residue on you?
He said, I was at the range the other day with my buddy, and I was shooting my .380, so I'd probably have gunshot residue on my hand.
Kelvin promises to return at 3 p.m. the following day with his .380.
He agreed to bring that gun in the next day and turn it over to me so we could examine it. That was pretty much the first interview that night with Mr. Washington. I actually drove him home.
There's no reason to hold him. They got no information that he's the actual shooter in this case. And he's being cooperative, so they're going to let him go.
With Kelvin seemingly in the clear, investigators have no leads until a tip comes in.
There was a lot of information coming in, some to uniformed officers, some to detectives, but the name Nebo kept coming up.
Police quickly understand that Nebo is not a proper name. It's what police sometimes call a street name. The person who committed this murder, the person who shot Jabbar, is named Nebo.
Detectives looking into the death of Jabbar McKenzie have just received a tip that a man who goes by the nickname Nebo is responsible for his death.
A lot of times the only way they're going to find out is if they, hit the pavement, start their networking, and try to figure out who Nebo is.
Detectives were contacted by a local FBI agent who said that he had some information that may be related to this homicide and that he had an informant that had this information and would be willing to share this information. So the detectives met with the informant, and that's when they first learned that Kelvin Washington was also known as Nebo on the streets.
Detectives look into the alibi Kelvin gave in his initial interview.
He's being very cooperative. He says he's got an alibi. He was home all day. You never take a suspect's word for the fact that he didn't do this. He gives you an alibi, you investigate that alibi now and determine if he's telling the truth.
When they take a close look at Kelvin's statement, they note a discrepancy.
I noticed when he talks about the time period of around 3 o'clock to 4 o'clock in the afternoon on Monday, the 5th, there's nobody else at the house, apparently.
Jabbar was shot just before 3:30 p.m.
He claims he was there and never left. So that, kind of piques your interest.
The next day at 3 p.m., Kelvin Washington returns to the police station as promised.
He conveniently forgot to bring the .380 and again claimed he didn't know exactly where it was anyway, but went into a little more detail about the issues he'd had over the years with Jabbar.
Kelvin Washington mentioned at one point he and a friend of his went to Bumper's Lounge one night, and lo and behold, Jabbar was there in the parking lot. And Kelvin said, we need to get out of here. I don't want any confrontation to go in here because I know something's going to happen if he sees me out here. So they left the parking lot. But Jabbar follows them out of the parking lot. And it's almost like a chase is going on where he's trying to get away from Jabbar, but Jabbar is following him. And he said it got to the point where Jabbar actually pulled a gun out and started shooting. He said nobody in the car was hit, but his car was hit 2 times.
Kelvin tells police the incident rattled him. He went to stay with his mother in Tennessee for a couple of months, hoping that Jabbar's temper would cool in the meantime.
He drove that car to Memphis to visit his mother, and she actually had the car painted and repaired to cover up those 2 bullet holes while he was down there. So it was documented that there was 2 bullet holes in that car.
But when he returned to Colorado Springs, Jabbar was anything but cool.
Kelvin tells police that Jabbar followed Kelvin's girlfriend back to her apartment, probably looking for him. And Kelvin says at this point, that's the last straw.
He explained that things had escalated recently to the point that either Thursday or Friday, Jabbar had driven by the Tahoe address, fired some shots at the house. He claims that this was witnessed by his stepfather, and then, of course, he goes to the range and does some practice.
When things like this ends up with weapons and guns being involved, people feel that they need to defend and protect themselves. As a young man, there's this need to defend and protect your territory.
Kelvin claims he was ready to defend himself if he had to, but maintains he did not kill Jabbar. Investigators aren't convinced.
And does he have the means? Well, he has a weapon. He practiced on Friday, so that's kind of circumstantial evidence, but we need more than that to make an arrest.
He was asked if he'd be willing to take a polygraph on the statements he was given.
During that second interview, we'd arranged for Nebo, Mr. Washington, to come in on the 7th, and he agreed to do a polygraph.
But before he comes back, detectives get a phone call that changes everything.
They find out who may have owned this white car that they saw leaving the crime scene. They contact a juvenile who was known to be associated with that car.
This informant happens to be a juvenile, a person under the age of 18.
So they went to his house and contacted his mother and said, we'd like to talk to your son. We're investigating this homicide case. He may be involved, he might not, but we'd like to talk to him. She said, sure, come on in, you can talk to him.
At this point, Mom calls him out and tells him that he needs to give police whatever information that they need. He's kind of hesitant because he knows that according to street law, you're not supposed to talk to police, but Mom pushes him to do the right thing.
Well, the kid's mother says, you be honest with these police officers, tell them what happened. And during that interview, he says, yes, he was with Kelvin Washington that particular day.
So in 10th grade, the frontal cortex is not fully developed. And what that means is that kids are much more reactive rather than reflective. And, in this case, it was just one thing after another. And so both boys saying things as they passed each other in the hallways, and things quickly escalated, as oftentimes happens in high school. I think sometimes our anger stems from other issues from the past that hasn't been addressed. And it's misguided and misdirected. And there is this need to right sometimes a wrong that causes people to engage in a short-term release that we'll get from engaging in the action and not the long-term consequences.
On June 7, 1995, Colorado Springs police interview a witness who says he was with Kelvin Washington on the afternoon Jabbar McKenzie was killed.
And he was with a guy named Big Will. Big Will was a friend of Kelvin Washington.
He claimed that the three of them, Big Will, Nebo, and himself, were driving around in the white car, and they were looking for marijuana.
Nebo was wearing a white t-shirt and jeans, which is important information for the police. Other witnesses say that the shooter was also wearing a white t-shirt and jeans.
He said as they're driving down the street, Kelvin Washington is telling them which way to go, and all of a sudden Kelvin says, "Stop the car and let me out."
They ended up dropping Nebo off somewhere west of the Champion Auto Parts store. Claims the other two drove around a bit.
He says about 10 or 15 minutes later, they come back and pick Kelvin Washington up.
Nebo got back in the vehicle and they left.
He says Kelvin has scored some marijuana, so then they go back to Kelvin's house and they're there the rest of the day. Nothing about any shooting, and he doesn't know about any shooting, didn't hear any gunshots, so doesn't know anything about that.
Detectives suspect that during the 15 minutes, Kelvin shot and killed Jabbar.
They were all together, and they dropped Kelvin Washington off right at the scene of the murder, and then the murder happens.
But the juvenile claims to know nothing about the actual killing.
I don't think that it was as innocent as what it was portrayed, but it was the best evidence that was going to be available to us at the time.
As they wrap up with the witness, investigators receive news that Kelvin Washington is at the police station taking a polygraph test.
I went back to police headquarters, met up with the other detectives, and immediately learned that Mr. Washington, Nebo, had failed his polygraph. So now we've got the polygraph failure, we've got the gunshot residue on his hands on Monday, we've got his presence at the scene on Monday when the crime occurred, we got a witness that puts him there, and we certainly have the motive.
It was determined then to present this case to our assistant district attorney at the time, who reviewed it and said, yeah, we're going to get a warrant and have him arrested.
On the evening of June 7th, just over 48 hours after the murder of Jabbar McKenzie, detectives confront Kelvin Washington with the new evidence against him.
Detectives are telling him, you know, we can put you in this area. No, I wasn't there. I was with Big Will and this juvenile. We were driving around, but we never went by that auto parts store. They never let me out. None of that stuff happened. The detective was saying, well, you know, we have evidence to the contrary, and we don't believe you. And that's when he said, you know what? I'm done with this interview, and I'm leaving. No, you're not. We have a warrant for your arrest, charging with murder. You're under arrest, and we're taking you into custody.
With Kelvin in custody, investigators trained their sights on locating the third person in the suspect vehicle, a man known as Big Will.
We were looking for Big Will as technically a witness, but somebody we thought could potentially be a co-defendant in this case.
Is he helping Kelvin Washington set up this homicide? Is he now driving a getaway car for Kelvin Washington to get away? Another confidential informant was contacted who said that he had seen Kelvin Washington and Big Will on that particular day, and that he had told Big Will that he would take him to the bus depot because Big Will was leaving Colorado Springs that afternoon to go back to Memphis. He picked Big Will up at Kelvin Washington's house, loaded up 6 boxes that he had with him that he was going to put on the bus. He noticed that the case for that .22 caliber pistol was in one of the boxes. He didn't actually see the pistol, but he did see the case for the pistol. So he assumed that the pistol was there and that Big Will was taking it back to Memphis with him.
Based on shell casings found at the crime scene, detectives know Jabbar McKenzie was killed with a .22.
Nebo claimed that he had a .380, not a .22 caliber.
Now we know that Big Will had a .22. Did Big Will give that .22 to Kelvin Washington to shoot Jabbar with?
The witness gives investigators Big Will's cell phone number.
Investigators were actually able to contact Big Will in Memphis. The investigator said, well, would you be willing to come back to Colorado Springs and talk to us? Oh, yeah, I'll be willing to. He kind of backtracked on that, and we couldn't get a hold of him anymore.
Myself and another detective from CSPD, we went down to Memphis.
We were unable to locate him, so we told the local authorities, you know, we need this guy back here on this murder case. If you can find him, pick him up, and that's what happened.
On June 13th, 1995, 8 days after the death of Jabbar McKenzie, suspected accomplice Big Will is taken into custody in Memphis.
We first talked to him on the telephone, and he was kind of hesitant about talking to my investigator, but did admit that, yes, he was with Kelvin Washington that day, and that he was driving, and the juvenile was in the back seat. But he says, we didn't shoot anybody. We were just out looking for some marijuana. Okay, well, we're going to bring you back and have you tell this story in court.
As with the juvenile, investigators have no proof that Big Will was an accomplice or even knew the shooting took place.
If we would have been able to charge him from an evidentiary standpoint by then, we would have, and he knew that.
Big Will makes his way back to Colorado, and so does the alleged murder weapon.
We were able to acquire the gun that Big Will had in his possession, and that was the .22 caliber handgun that we're certain was involved in the commission of the crime.
We were able to get that .22 caliber back, make the matches that were necessary. So there was our .22 caliber, which was really the only missing piece of evidence was the actual gun itself.
In January 1996, Kelvin Washington goes on trial for the first-degree murder of Jabbar McKenzie. Prosecutors put eyewitnesses from the crime scene on the stand.
They were able to identify what the assailant was wearing. They were able to identify what kind of car they were driving. They were able to identify which direction he ran in.
But the defense claims that even though Kelvin matches the description given by witnesses, police arrested the wrong man.
At trial, it was the defense's theory of the case that this was not Kelvin Washington, that this was a case of mistaken identity.
Prosecutors allege that what started as a beef between two high school kids escalated until Kelvin sought the ultimate revenge.
He was tired of it. He was tired of being shot at. His car was being shot at. His mother's house was being shot at. He was just tired of all that.
When Kelvin saw Jabbar at the store, he saw his chance to put a permanent end to the feud.
Kelvin saw this as his opportunity to take Jabbar's life. He wasn't going to allow him to get back in the car and walk away and breathe another day.
You can't pull out a gun and go stalk somebody and shoot them 6 times because you're being bullied.
It seemed that the prosecution had the stronger of the two cases. But at the very end, you just never know exactly what the jury's going to come back with.
Ultimately, Kelvin Washington was found guilty of first-degree murder, and in Colorado, that carries a mandatory penalty of life in prison without the possibility of parole, which is where he was sentenced to.
Most homicides, the victim knows their perpetrator, and in this case, it wasn't a family member; it was a known enemy. This is going to be a situation of two people, where one's going to be a victim and one's going to be a perpetrator. There's going to be a life spent, and there's going to be a life ruined. And in this case, Jabbar's life was spent and Nebo's life was ruined.
It was just inevitable that somebody was going to be hurt or killed, and now we know how it ended.
I took it hard, took it real hard. And you could say I lost my mind a little bit for not being my brother's keeper, you know, because we was close, all of us was close, you know, and I didn't know how to deal with it.
It could have all been prevented if somebody was able to sit down with them and do some conflict resolution. Let's talk about our differences. Let's get all of this misunderstanding out to the surface so we can actually know what is going on. Since that didn't happen, we have two tragedies.